Welcome to Strip Cover Lit, where we squeeze the bigger picture out of literature. I am Adrian Fort, and we are here for a writer's quote video. Now, this is going to serve, I believe this is the 18th video in this series, but it's going to serve as what I believe Hollywood refers to as a soft reboot. What I mean by that is that there are 17 other videos predating this video in the series. However, those videos date all the way back to the opening weeks of the channel. The opening weeks of the channel would be the closing weeks of 2015. This was something I stopped doing on the channel for a very long time. That is problematic because, I'm going to be honest with you, I don't remember what quotes they were that I've already put in this series, and I can't stand the sound of my own voice. So, going back and checking would be a melodramatic and painful process for your best friend Adrian. So I'm not going to do it. Tough titties if there's a quote that I double up on. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to reboot, soft reboot. Those other videos exist. I'm going to soft reboot this series and not go back and check. The second thing I want to say is that this is obviously going to be a video that is in the writer's quote playlist here on the channel. It's also going to be part of a 2-channel event. I will leave a comment from my personal channel in the comments section below. I'm going to pin it to the top, so it's going to be the top comment down there. If you click on my little icon, you will follow me over to my personal channel where I do things. I talk about movies, I talk about working out a little bit, things like that. I do an Ask Adrian Anything series where you can ask me anything you want, no matter how wily you get. So I'm going to do a video on this channel every day of September, and I'm going to do a video on that channel every day of September. So feel free to follow me over there as well. Let's get into things. This quote, this writer's quote, comes to us from Papa. This is Ernest Hemingway on Writing, edited by Larry W. Phillips. The quote is as such. It comes to us from page 3 in a section called What Writing Is and Does. I am trying to make, before I get through, a picture of the whole world, or as much of it as I have seen, boiling it down always, rather than spreading it out thin. This was written to Mrs. Paul Pfeiffer in 1933 plucked from Selected Letters, page 397. So, that's the quote. I am trying to make, before I get through, a picture of the whole world, or as much of it as I have seen, boiling it down always, rather than spreading it out thin. So let's talk about this quote a little bit. I think that the important thing to take from this quote right off the bat is the fact that Ernest Hemingway was obviously setting goals as a writer. This is a goalerific quote. This is something by which Ernest Hemingway had decided. Ernest Hemingway was born in 1899, so at the time of this quote, he would have been 34. That's my age. I'm 34, about to be 35. Eventually. But he would have been 34 years old and still conceptualizing himself as a writer, still finding goals for himself as a writer, still defining himself as a writer. This is Ernest Hemingway. This is Papa. How many things had he done already by the age of 34? Accomplished more things in his writing career than ever will I. So I think it's important to set a goal for what you will be definitionally as a writer. I hope. I'm going to share a little bit about my goals. My main goal, the way I want people, I've got this fantasy of a conversation between two people. And one of them says to the other one, hey, I just read this short story that it just kicked my ass. It was funny. It was sad. It was a shot in the arm. It was a kick in the ass. It was a slap in the back of the head, all in 1,500 words. Golly, I can't tell you the things that short story did to me in 1,500 words. 4 pages. 4 pages of a short story, and it kicked my ass. Oh, yeah? What was it? Who was it by? Oh, it was by this guy, Adrian Fort. Oh, yeah, Adrian Fort. Did you know he also wrote Blank and Blank? What? That guy wrote those stories and this short story? Wow. That's weird. They have nothing conceptually to do with one another. Now, the reason I have that fantasy as a sort of a goal, as a meta goal for my writing, is that if I were to tell you I read A Farewell to Arms, and you said, oh yeah, have you ever read The Old Man and the Sea? Yes, Ernest Hemingway too. Yeah, that makes sense. They've got the same palette. I want to be a writer who does not succumb to a palette. I want to be able to do all these different types of things to people. I just marked on my arm, didn't I? Yeah. I want to be able to do all these different types of things to people with the written word, to where people would have no idea, without seeing the byline, that any of my short stories, poems, novels were connected to one another by the author. That is, to me, the line where Hemingway says, I want to create a picture of the whole world. Because what Hemingway is doing is he's creating a picture of the whole world through his eyes. And that is certainly one way to do it, but I want to use different people's eyes. I really do. I want to tell people how they see things. So that's, what are your goals as a writer? How is it that you wish to be conceptualized sort of as a writer? I think, though it is a bit of an egocentric practice, I think it's necessary as much as it is important. Meaning that if all you're doing is sitting down and putting one word after another, you might be aiming to build a wall, but you might never get to that second layer of bricks. You might just keep putting down that first brick after first brick after first brick and never moving up. So I think it's important to have goals. Second, your voice. What is your voice? Hemingway, in this quote, knows his voice. Boiling it down always rather than spreading it out thin. Hemingway, a notoriously minimalist writer. Hemingway knew his voice, understood his voice, was able to put a theory of writing in such that it encompassed his voice. Ernest Hemingway's theory of writing, the iceberg principle, which you should definitely look up if you're not familiar with it, says that the writing you get in a story, say you're going along in a boat like the Titanic, and you see this little piece of ice. You know that the whole iceberg is way more than that. So all you're getting when you read the story is the tip of the iceberg. That's all that is being provided to you in the words of the story. The rest of everything going on is under the water. That's the iceberg principle, the iceberg theory. But he's putting into words his theory of writing in the fact that he wants to boil it down always rather than spreading it out thin. That is a theory of writing. He is a minimalist rather than a maximalist. So one example of a maximalist might be William Faulkner. So William Faulkner, As I Lay Dying, open it up to any page in here. Jewel does not look at Paul. You better call Vardaman back here, he says. He looks at Cash, then he turns and goes away. Get him to talk as soon as you can, he says, so he can tell us what else there was. We return to the river. The wagon is hauled clear, the wheels chalked. Carefully we all helped. It is as though upon the shabby, familiar, inert shape of the wagon there lingered somehow latent yet immediate that violence which had slain the mules that drew it not an hour since. Above the edge of the flood, in the wagon bed it lies profoundly. The long, pale planks hushed a little with wedding, yet still yellow, like gold seen through water, save for the two long muddy smears. We pass it back and go on the bank. We pass it back and go on to the bank. These things are all true to these characters, all of that necessary drama through the voice of, I think that was Darrell. That is maximalism, though. Hemingway would not have said as much would not have said so many words in as much of the story. So I'm going to take you to Hills Like White Elephants. All right, but you've got to realize. I realize, the girl said. Can't we maybe stop talking? They sat down at the table, and the girl looked across the hills on the dry side of the valley, and the man looked at her and at the table. You've got to realize, he said, that I don't want you to do it if you don't want to. I'm perfectly willing to go through with it if it means anything to you. Doesn't it mean anything to you? We could get along. Of course it does. But I don't want anybody but you. I don't want anyone else. And I know it's perfectly simple. Hemingway writes in a cut and dry fashion, boiling it down rather than spreading it out thin. So what does it mean to boil down? All you're doing when you boil it down is you're taking out the water, right? That's what boiling something down literally means. So for Hemingway, let's go to the opening paragraph of Hills Like White Elephants. This is all the description we're really going to get here. Keep that in mind. One of the most iconic short stories of all time. This is basically all of the description you get. And many Hemingway short stories rely upon this mechanism of an opening paragraph being all of the description you get. The hills across the valley of the Ebro were long and white. On this side there was no shade and no trees, and the station was between the two lines of rails in the sun. Close against the side of the station there was the warm shadow of the building, and a curtain made of strings of bamboo beads hung across the open door to the bar, to keep out flies. The American and the girl with him sat at the table in the shade, outside the building. It was very hot, and the express from Barcelona would come in 40 minutes. It stopped at this junction for 2 minutes and went on to Madrid. That's all of the description we get. He takes out the water. What's the water? The water is your description of the man, your description of the girl with him. So when he says the American, the man, the American, what does that communicate? It communicates a grown man who's from America. When it says the girl, what does that communicate? If he's the American, she must not be. Where's she from? If she's the girl, she's not as old as him. All the other things that you need to know is going to be from the water that you provide, the water that you pour on top to hydrate those noodles. He's boiled the noodles down. You've got to rehydrate them. What does the man look like? You're going to populate that man's face in your mind. You're going to populate that girl's clothes in your mind. You're going to do all that work. He's given you the boiled down necessities. So that's the boiling down part. I want to talk about the spreading it out thin. This is, after all, Ernest Hemingway's theory of writing. It's not everyone's. So I'm going to go to a different story. Lord of the Rings. We're going to go to the opening paragraph of Lord of the Rings. Maybe a little bit more than that, because the opening paragraph is actually pretty short. When Mr. Bilbo Baggins of Bag End announced that he would shortly be celebrating his 11th birthday with a party of special magnificence, there was much talk and excitement in the Hobbiton. Bilbo was very rich and very peculiar, and had been the wonder of the Shire for 60 years, ever since his remarkable disappearance and unexpected return. The riches he had brought back from his travels had now become a local legend, and it was popularly believed, whatever the old folks might say, that the hill at Bag End was full of tunnels stuffed with treasure. And if that was not enough for fame, there was also his prolonged vigor to marvel at. Time wore on, but it seemed to have little effect on Mr. Baggins. At 90, he was much the same as at 50. At 99, they would begin to call him well preserved, but unchanged would have been much nearer the mark. There were some that shook their heads and thought that it was too much of a good thing. It seemed unfair that anyone should possess apparently perpetual youth as well as reputedly inexhaustible wealth. That doesn't sound anything at all like Hemingway, does it? That sounds, dare I say, spread out thin. Because what it's doing is it's telling us a whole lot without showing it to us. We have in this book 458 pages by which we might learn that everyone in the Shire held him as a wonder. We might learn, in fact, we do later in the chapter, that everyone finds his riches remarkable and comments on them. So why do we need it twice? Boil it out, says Hemingway, and give it to us once. Give it to us once and we don't need it again. But J.R.R. Tolkien decided, I'm going to tell it to you, and then I'm going to show you. That is a little bit different than the maximalism of Faulkner. What Faulkner does is he shows it to us. And then he shows us one character's reaction and gives us another character's reaction and tells us that this was because another character might react as such. That is maximalism versus Hemingway's minimalism, which says, I'm going to show you everything, and at that point, it's on you. Versus the writing style of J.R.R. Tolkien, who says, I'm going to set it up for you. I'm going to tell you. Then I'm going to show you so you know what I mean by it. But it is in Hemingway's opinion that we should, as writers, try to make, before we're through, a picture of the whole world, or as much of it as we have seen, boiling it down always, rather than spreading it out thin.